Hi, I'm Dr. Greg Jicha from the University of Kentucky Alzheimer Disease Center, and I'm here today to talk about TDP-43 as a confound in ADRD clinical trials. I hope it's not too late to fix this. My disclosures below, those in red, are NIH funding to work on TDP-43 and late. I think we need to start this conversation by thinking about how late should be understood in the context of clinical trials for degenerative disease. We know that multi-etiology dementia is the rule, not the exception. Identifying pure disease that is the target of the intervention may be harder than we think. And understanding that taking this time to understand these confounds in clinical trials is imperative to move the field forward. What we did in this study was link our participant database, which includes tracking of whether or not an individual participated in an interventional trial, with our neuropath database. The clinical trials were classified as MCI-AD trials, or AD prevention trials, or clinical trials for vascular cognitive impairment and dementia. We use standard demographic and neuropathologic variables from the NAC data set and analyze these for the presentation. So first, let's take a look at those participants that participated in clinical trials versus those that did not in our autopsy cohort. And what we see is that they are very similar in terms of their demographic and clinical variables, with the exception of CDR scores that were lower in clinical trial participants, a result of targeting earlier stage interventions in most of our clinical trials currently. What we found when looking at the pathology is that, like in our longitudinal cohorts, multi-etiology pathology is the rule, not the exception, with large numbers of pathologic features. The presence of quadruple misfolded proteinopathy, amyloid, tau, TDP-43, and alpha-synuclein reaching 18% in MCI-AD trials within the same subject, and that the relative percentage of pure disease that was the target of the intervention being less than 30%. 1 out of every 3 individuals meets the true criteria without comorbid pathologic features. So looking specifically at TDP-43, we find that almost a third of clinical trial participants have comorbid TDP-43. That was not the target of the intervention, and a similar number have hippocampal sclerosis contributing. We wanted to look at whether or not there were distinguishing clinical or demographic features that might help us enrich for pure disease and eliminate this confound of TDP-43 pathology. And the data is shown below. It raises the question as to whether or not we might want to look for participants that are younger, more likely female, with lower education and higher MMSE scores, and whether or not this could help us minimize this confound of comorbid TDP-43 pathology. Likewise, we looked at associated pathologic features, realizing that the more advanced the amyloidosis, the more advanced the neurofibrillary tangle stage, the more advanced the alpha-synucleinopathy, cerebral atrophy, and CAA were, the higher likelihood there would be for comorbid TDP-43 pathology. So that really begs the question as to what we're going to do about this confound. We know that 1 out of every 3 ADRD trial participants have comorbid late. If we embrace this, we might be able to improve inclusion-exclusion criteria, rationally use antemortem biomarkers and clinical exam findings, and improve our power analyses to take into account this unseen variable of comorbid TDP-43 pathology. I hope that in the future we develop antemortem biomarkers for TDP-43, but until that time, we have to work with what we have. I'd like to thank all of my co-investigators, the NIH, the entire clinical trials unit, all of the individuals that are engaged in pharmaceutical and drug discovery, interventional trials, but most importantly, the patients that participate in not only the clinical and interventional trials, but also our neuropathologic and autopsy consents so that we can understand these variables more fully. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate your attention and patience.